Hey guys, it's Shelbi, and today I am so excited for this video because I am joined by the one and only
Kathryn from Going Zero Waste.
Yes, she is also a sustainability content creator. I prefer this title. And I'm really excited for this video called 15 Ways. Is it 15? Is that what we decided on?
Yes.
15 things the zero waste movement got wrong. And I think it's going to be really fun because Kathryn and I both share this opinion that sustainability, and zero waste is a lot more gray area than the black and white way it's been presented for so long. So we came up with some ideas, some key points we wanted to touch on. And if you want to see the rest of the 15 that we're not going to cover in today's video, go. Hi, Noah. Can you sit? If you want to see the rest of the 15 things we're not going to cover in this video, you can go check out Kathryn's video, which is going to be linked at the top of the description. So I think the first point and the big overall point is that the zero waste movement was way too focused on only one part of the life cycle of a product. We kind of pigeonholed ourselves into talking about only this one aspect of the environment, while undermining the rest of it.
And a lot of the materials that we use as substitutes in order to be quote-unquote plastic-free, they aren't environmentally benign. I mean, nothing is environmentally benign, but the fact is that sometimes people would make worse choices in the name of reducing plastic, and that's just sometimes can be really counterproductive.
So that kind of leads me into basically that, but more specifically subbing, things that are maybe packaged in plastic and then only focusing on paper, as if paper is better simply because it is compostable, whereas plastic is not. Whereas there are so many issues associated with paper packaging, such as things that we've gone through, like tearing down old growth forests, taking indigenous lands, creating monocultures, which are not good for biodiversity.
And would be spreading things like diseases, like wildfire, because there's no really biodiversity to stop that loss at all.
The things that nature naturally built in, we've stripped away to create paper. And I think a lot of people think that paper is also more sustainable in some ways because there are a lot of regulations put in place to stop deforestation.
For every tree you plant, you have to plant 10 in its place. But what they're doing is they're removing a lot of old growth because they didn't plant those trees to begin with. So I think there are some areas, like for instance, a lot of Christmas tree farms, they plant the trees themselves, and those are the trees that they're harvesting. And that is going to be a lot more sustainable than going in and logging healthy old growth forest. That's not necessarily the best way to do things, and then replacing them with just, like you said, all these monocrops and monocultures. And paper doesn't have a super robust recycling infrastructure here in the US. China was the largest global buyer of all plastic and paper for recycling, and a lot of that stopped in 2018, right? January.
Yep. And not only that, but paper is not recyclable once it's been soiled by, in some places, in most places, not recyclable once it's been soiled by grease, food, liquids, and only 27% of people in the US have access to composting. So looking at it from only the end of life cycle perspective is so narrow. Like the paper versus plastic bag situation. It's it's a very good illustration of the downfall of focusing on only one area.
Absolutely.
Right. In a similar vein, I think it's interesting to talk about the nuances of focusing so much more on glass than instead of plastic. Personally, this is something I definitely did a lot in the beginning, and because glass is infinitely recyclable, but it still doesn't actually have a super high recycled rate. Do you know what the numbers are?
I don't actually know the hard numbers on that, but most places don't even accept glass for recycling.
That too.
It's so expensive to truck it to the glass recycling facility. You have to get super, super high temperatures, so the emissions are pretty high on recycled glass. But I think the biggest criminal thing about glass overall is that we're actually running out of the sand that's used to create the glass. There's a huge issue with this right now. There's a fantastic glass recycling program that was launched by Tulane graduates in New Orleans, and they're recycling glass in the city and using it to create sand to help bolster their coastlines, which is
I think I've seen
amazing.
This.
It's so cool. So there definitely are some really cool recycling things that are happening, but in the long run, the only way to make glass the more eco-friendly option is if it's something that you're gonna reuse.
Right. It's definitely a lot more complicated than just choose glass because it's infinitely recyclable.
And we talk a little bit about aluminum in my video, but one of the things I thought was really interesting, so we went to Target just to go see how many products are offered now in metals, aluminum, sustainable paper packaging, just like looking at all the different things. And I don't know if you noticed, but every single aluminum bottle had a big dent in it. Every single one.
Oh, right. And people hate that.
Right.
It's so weird, like, why people care, but they do.
Right.
Yeah.
And so is that going to be something that affects the saleability of the product? And is that actually going to have a worse environmental footprint?
Yeah. Yeah. So many things to consider, which is kind of the overarching idea of all the points in this video.
Right, which is, have you thought about?
These videos are really just listen to our overactive brains. This one I know you have a real issue with. Single-use compostable items. People just like kind of trading disposables that weren't compostable for ones that are. There are a lot of issues with this, but I'm going to let you take it away for the first little bit.
The most eco-friendly option, right, is going to be to reuse something. And we really just have to move away from a disposable mindset, right, and really move towards a reusable mindset. I just think it's a really good perspective, right? It takes 37 gallons of water to make one roll of toilet paper. It takes 8 gallons of water to make one paper plate, right? When we're looking at this, it only takes 3 to 5 gallons for modern dishwashing machines to wash an entire load. So if we look at the water cost, and I know Shelby's all about virtual water. So if we look at the water cost of what it takes to wash a load of dishes versus one paper plate, I mean, using reusable items is always going to be better in the long run because you're going to be using fewer resources. So if we're switching out for disposable for disposable, choosing sometimes what's considered to be the more eco or earth-friendly option like paper, aluminum, or glass, actually really, as far as emissions go,
a lot higher.
Is a lot higher.
And I think also like a lot of people are thinking that creating some sort of compostable plastics will solve our plastic crisis, but also the fact that most of those materials are not backyard compostable. Like we already said, only about 27% of people in the US have access to that. And so us kind of just saying like, well, we could just come up with a biodegradable compostable option. It's really not that simple without like getting systems to like compost those materials.
So what do we need?
Systems change.
And extended producer responsibility.
This as well. Well, I mean, I feel like that's also part of the system.
Oh, absolutely.
So they're the same. One and the same.
Yes. We need both of these things. We need all of these things.
Yeah.
This is a yes and situation.
Always. I think initially, like when I joined the zero waste movement back in 2016, the movement was presented like on social media, in the media in general, and all those sort of things as an incredibly privileged thing to be able to do. Or like the things you were expected to do, incredibly classist, incredibly ableist. And I think it was a mistake that the zero waste movement made overall to not consider different disabilities. And even like just something as simple as saying like go to your bulk bins. Majority of people do not have access to these things.
I don't want to throw shade, so I'm not going to say the person's name, but I went to see someone talk. And some of the things that were said left me baffled, especially, I know Shelby's from Texas. I grew up in Arkansas, and this person said, well, everyone has bulk bins. And I was like, I'm sorry, have you been to Arkansas?
Yeah.
Have you been around Arkansas? Because there's one Whole Foods and it's about, an hour away for my mom. I just remember just kind of the audacity of that statement and being really confused.
We were saying, we do polls on our Instagram where thousands of people participate, and that audience is already a sustainably minded, like they're already kind of biased in that way. But even then, only around 40% of my audience had access to bulk. And whatever that means for everybody, right? Access is different for someone than it is for someone else, because I have access to bulk bins. It's still like a 20-minute drive for me. So it's, it's all different, and I just think that it was definitely not taking into consideration so many different barriers for so many different people. And if the zero waste movement at its core in the beginning was going to work wide scale, it just was very, very much like not possible. And they didn't really, I didn't see many people talking about it. So a great segue off of that is obviously, like, we thought of the zero waste movement had a lot of like privilege built into it, but we also thought of like a lot of people who use single-use products are often people of lower income brackets. And so we think, well, they produce more trash. They must have like a bigger environmental or carbon footprint.
And if I can add an example, one of the things I see was demonizing people in Asia for using sachets, because literally they can only afford a tiny bit of a product, so they get just a tiny sachet of what they need, right? And that adds to a lot of plastic pollution. That was demonized, and so often, even when we talk about recycling, right, we blame China because 7 of the 10 most polluting rivers run through China, but whose trash really is that?
Exactly. And yeah, that's a definitely a disparity, like the income bracket of people in China versus the US, and that being where all of our stuff is. Yeah, that was a great point.
Right.
But we'll throw up this chart right here for you guys, that basically the lower your income bracket is, the likelihood that your carbon footprint is smaller. And so it's definitely like this weird dichotomy of like, we think of people in this way, but in reality the numbers show a completely different picture.
Right.
And I think it's something the zero waste movement, maybe like we just didn't simply understand it. We didn't have the same data back then. With
more attention being brought on to environmental issues, I feel like we're seeing a lot more data.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot more science-backed, science-driven, peer-reviewed studies come out now. With social media, right, we're able to disseminate information in a much different way. We're able to get that information into the hands of a lot of people, and you have people who are like communicators who are helping break that down and share that knowledge with the general public.
Yeah. My next point that I wanted to say is that the zero waste movement, I think it's so complicated, like you said, a double-edged sword. But one of the biggest mistakes now, looking at it, like the actual solutions, is that the zero waste movement shifted so much responsibility from producers onto individuals. Like, it basically became the weight of the world was on our shoulders, you and me, like, specifically, to change the world. And now we're having to basically fight against that narrative.
We played right into big oil's hands.
And we just had no idea.
We just played into it. We were like, yes. But there was even, I think it was BP or one of the oil companies actually invented the term carbon footprint to quite literally put the responsibility onto the individual.
Right.
Individual action is very important. It's a very important part and piece of the puzzle, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. We need to use our individual action to join up with a group, something like the Sunrise Movement. I mean, I have so much praise for the Sunrise Movement. The Citizens
I
Climate,
love them too.
I know, they're so good. The Citizens Climate Lobby, right? Working with these groups and these organizations in order to create larger change, ensuring that we're also getting active on a political level, civic engagement. It's all part of that, but we definitely focus too much, I think, on bring your own bags. I mean, which is great and something that is important, but it can't stop there.
Right.
It can't stop just in your home changes. It has to go a little bit further.
And on that note, there's a little bit of a perspective shift I had recently. I don't know if this works for everybody, but it really was interesting to me, is that the actions I'm taking and the things I'm doing and the choices I'm making are not to like influence change for the next person, right? It's not to make the next individual go zero waste. Like, my actions, I'm hoping to influence the businesses I do and don't support. I'm hoping to influence the lawmakers who will adjust what they're making policy around based on our actions, and not necessarily for me to like change my mom's mind. It's just a perspective shift I had recently, which, like you said, it's all important, but to me it was never about like changing the next person's mind.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This one I also find really interesting, and it's just like all of our attention, right, was on single-use plastics, and like they never get recycled, so we don't want to choose them. And we would talk about choosing paper and aluminum and glass. But if instead we focused on really like making our recycling systems better, I think we would maybe be in an even better place right now.
Right. Almost like companies who produce materials, you required them to take them back and then reuse them in their materials, almost like a fully effective recycling system done through extended producer responsibility.
If we had like honed in and spent as much energy and time as we did on our individual footprints,
yes,
what would the world look like?
Right, especially because, and we talked about this a bit in my video, which is Pepsi, is in more countries than the UN. And if Pepsi implemented something like that, where they took back all of their bottles and literally remade them into new bottles and completely closed the loop, how would that change the world? And the thing is, that will affect more people than what we do individually, because we've made the system easier for everyone.
Right.
And I mean, I think we can look at some, other countries have bottle deposits, which are great, which means the collection of single-use bottles is high because they pay them to take them back and to get them.
Right.
As much as Coca-Cola wants to say they're eco-friendly, they fight tooth and nail against bottle deposits.
Right.
And that's what we need. We need it.
This is what we need. I hope this got your mind thinking. I hope it sucked you in really quickly to the overthinking brains that we have, so that you could start thinking and helping us implement solutions and really exploring the nuanced problems of the zero waste and sustainability movements, and just always be open to changing your minds, because that's something we've had to learn to do a lot.
Absolutely.
If you want to see the rest of the 15 things, if you haven't already seen them, like I said, Kathryn's video will be linked at the top of the description. Her name is Going Zero Waste everywhere on the internet. So remember, until next time, you cannot do all the good that the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do. Bye, guys.